12, 2013 maintenance and operation, soft capital and insurance proceeds budgets in accordance with state statute and board policy. Mr. Palmer.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board, good evening. This hearing, as you said, is required by statute. There is no truth in taxation hearing this year as there was in the last 2 years because we are not levying adjacent ways this year, and that's an automatic. If you do that, you have the truth in taxation hearing, so we just have an M&O budget. So we'll look at the budget, budgets by fund, a little bit of M&O, and then evaluations and tax rates. And there's the remainder of the adjacent ways that'll be a cash carry forward now until we have a further need for it. But we did levy $1 million to build Papago with, to do sidewalks, bus bays, etc. M&O remains our biggest fund. Bond proceeds were second last year, but we're down to remaining cash. Federal and state programs at 13.6, food services about the same, and then our capital funds, which again remain mostly carry forward now. Our revenue for unrestricted capital for 2013 will be about $850,000. So that's a little bit of an increase from the year before, but still far from the $1.5 million that we've traditionally gotten. Soft capital, we had a zero allocation last year, and it's about $150,000 this year. So it's still,
so the remainder of that is carried forward.
Yeah, and it's still not enough to maintain what we currently do. And
Mr. Walmer, what was soft capital, say, in 2008 or 9?
Traditionally, it was $1.5 million as well. It's about the same as unrestricted capital.
$1.5 million.
Yeah.
Now it's
150,000 roughly. Yeah. Breakdown of our M&O funds. There's 3 sections here at Creighton with M&O, regular education, special education, and transportation. By object, as always, salary and benefits, the single biggest piece, with services, supplies, and miscellaneous. That miscellaneous, it's just kind of a scattering. Conference registrations and travel and things like that are in there, along with anything that can't be sort of categorized anywhere else. So it's always kind of a sliver, but services and materials about 13%, and everything else is salaries and benefits. By function, classroom instruction, of course, the biggest. Maintenance of plant, student support, that's nurses, psychologists, speech pathologists, etc. People who are not teachers but deal directly with students. School administration is the school offices, principal, assistant principal, office manager, secretary. Central services is business services, human resources, and technology. Transportation, and then teacher support is the research and evaluation department, the special ed department, and curriculum.
Scott, how have those percentages changed in recent years? Have they changed much?
They've not changed much. As we've dropped, everything has dropped. General administration is the superintendent's office, the governing board. Non-instructional is a match that we're required to provide for the food service program. It requires that the school district chip in, and that's a calculation that we have to do each year. Here's a change from the prior year budget. So the top line is our May 15th amended for the current year. So career ladder, of course, is being phased out. We're now 3 years out, and we lose 20% each year. Funding for K-3 reading was an increase. We have lost both students, and within our students, we've also lost the ELL designation by a fairly hefty margin. When we lose students, we also have to recalculate our override. And our carry forward monies, both M&O and Career Ladder, have increased a little bit. And that brings us to the 32.5 at the bottom. So loss this year is about $500,000 on that.
Scott, the funding for K-3 reading, that's going on for reading or something like that, right?
It's to support the costs that would go on with that program.
That's new?
That is new.
Okay.
Mr. Wellman, how will those funds be expended? It's my understanding that every district has to have some sort of plan that it is submitting to ADE.
We're still waiting for the clarification on the rules around, the parameters around using those dollars. But yes, there are some specific rules around the schools that receive certain grades. And I believe schools with C's or lower have to submit a plan, but only those schools that are D's and lower have to have it approved by the state board.
Okay. That sounds correct. What I've seen, I can't remember exactly, but
Primary assessed valuations. They lost 20-some% last year and 13.4 this year. I believe it was 27 point something last year. So we're still declining in that area. And as those assessed valuations drop, it takes a higher tax rate to provide the same revenue to the district. So those rates are up. These are those same figures, only this is the total tax rate. For not that dark on my screen.
now, Mr. Walmer, given does the reduction in property value completely offset the increase in the property tax rate on an aggregate level? I realize property taxes are kind of a zero-sum game. It depends on what everyone's particular property does on a given year. But should people generally overall, are we expecting property taxes would remain about the same?
In theory, if everybody's house moved at the same rate and Creighton's budget, which is calculated without regard to property values, your tax bill would stay the same. Doesn't quite work that way. The assessor may get to part of the district and not another part to revalue. And I don't know everything about what they do. I know that last year there was some discrepancy. Some parts of the district had an increase and some did not. So that's what goes on in there.
And I do know, not to belabor that, but it also can depend on what happens with, say, commercial property versus residential.
Yeah.
Here in the mid-2000s, when we had a 55% increase in residential property values, our valuations did result in higher taxes for the most part, not necessarily because you get 55% increase in your property value in 1 year means a 55% increase in your property taxes, but if residential went up 55% and office space went up 10%, then if you look at the pie piece, the residential gets a much bigger piece of the pie, and it's basically a tax shift.
Yeah, the best thing that can happen to you is you have a utility move into your district. They
Yes.
pay the highest rate, then commercial, then residential, and then historical property pays virtually nothing. So that probably plays the biggest role. If we had a swath of Central Avenue or something like that, it would be a different story. So this is my estimate, and this slide really is kind of confusing because it assumes a house with a $250,000 value, and this is what would happen to your actual property tax, but remember, if your house was worth $250,000 in 11/12, it would not be worth that much in the following year. So this is really a difficult thing to show in a slide. The qualifying tax rate has been increased again. The qualifying tax rate controls the ratio between how much of our M&O budget is provided by the state and how much is provided by our primary ratepayers. So the raising of the qualifying tax rate increases the burden on our taxpayers. On the other side, we did not levy for adjacent ways, so that's a $500,000 decrease in our levy, because that's all property taxpayers. The state doesn't chip in for adjacent ways, and our M&O budget has dropped $500,000. Capital is up a little bit, so that offsets that, but the tax bill for our district is going to be less than it was last year.
Mr. Walmer, do you have an idea? I know that we had produced at the time of our bond and capital override campaign last fall a sheet that showed that the percentage of the funds in our district that come from the local property tax versus the state had gone, I want to say, from 31% to 46% or something in that neighborhood. You know, I assume that number goes up a little bit, but is there any idea of what that is, or is that something that we could update at least?
I could do an estimate. I have not updated. I could do an estimate, and then I could fix it when the actuals come out.
I just think it's something important for us to share with legislators as well as constituents when people come to us, as they do, saying, why did you increase our property tax bill, even though our budget's been going down for years now, as you just saw it's going down again this next year, yet people may see their property taxes increase.
Yeah.
And some of that definitely has to do with the fact that in spite of the fact that many of these people talk about not raising taxes, they've shifted the tax burden to local property taxpayers. It may look like somebody else did it.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. That was a good chart too. I'll do that. I'll update that and pass it out. There also was a question about what the impact would be had we issued, or should we choose to issue, that $6 million in bonding capacity that's available to us. If we were to do that in the current year and for the next couple of years, it would be an interest payment that would be the difference. As it stands now, if we don't issue any more of this bond authorization in 2016, that tax rate would drop, because that chunk of bonds that we have already issued would be almost paid off. And if we did issue that money, that's where that principal payback would go, 2016, 2017. So the secondary tax rate would be maintained for those 2 years as money would be collected and to pay off those bonds. And then beyond that, we did participate in the Build America bond program, and those are to be paid off in 2020-21. So there would be interest payments only in that slot there from 2016 to 2020, and it was built that way, assuming that we would issue that second $22 million, and it would fill that gap right there, and the tax rate would remain steady throughout that program. So we have yet to see whether we'll get legislative help or what the future holds.
So, Mr. Walmer, failing to, if we do not issue any further bonds or sell any further bonds, then it sounds like it's sometime in the 2017 or 18 year when people will start seeing their secondary property taxes start falling.
It would be 2016. 2016, we would not have to collect for a principal payment. We would still owe about $300,000 in interest on those Build America bonds that get paid off farther down the road.
When would we be able to go out to the voters again seeking another bond, increasing our bonding authority, or allowing us to sell? Maybe we wouldn't, because maybe we just don't, I guess we don't have that bonding authority.
Right, we don't have bonding capacity. Our authorization to issue $22 million worth of bonds, we're about to enter year 3. So that authority lasts for 6 years. So we have year 3, 4, 5, 6. We have 4 years left, in which to issue that 22 million.
Okay, so at some point, if we needed more money, it definitely appears at this point we won't have money to build a new school, or significantly renovate or replace a new school, but if we were to need additional money for repairs and it was within what was listed for when the voters approved the current bonds, we still have a few years that we could go out and sell bonds to raise money for repairs.
Yes, and a lot will happen in those years. I don't think it takes a whole lot of an uptick to create a lot of capacity. Besides, every year we make about a $4 million payment on principal that frees up that capacity. So, you know, towards that year 5, year 6, we still may or may not have enough to fix up another school, but you know, we'll have to see.
But if the legislature increases the capacity, we don't need to go back to the voters within this
True.
3-year time frame that we have left. We can just sell that and do what we need to do internally.
That's true.
Okay.
And I've not heard, I don't know if there's any push for that next year or not. They've tried twice, so you never know.
I think they might. I mean, there's some upset parents in Kyrene.
Well, and there's an election, so
Yeah.
the current legislature and governor are not going to do anything about it. But
That's the end of my presentation. Any other questions about the budget at all, in general?
Any further questions? Thank you, Mr. Walmer. I'd like to adjourn the public hearing, the public budget hearing.